I'm so excited to be here with Meg Tady, author of A Bluebird Day. And this is really cool because we did an in-person interview here in Denver at Veronica Beard, and there were a handful of, not just, I was supposed to say a handful of women, but there was a man there too. And it was like a book review, interview, and I fell in love with this book. It's beautifully written, and it's such a layered book that it's like my kind of read. So it was wonderful for me. I read it really, I want to say really quickly, but that sounds like an insult. So I think I'm not going to say that, but for me, it's a great compliment. Like I couldn't put it down. I read it really quickly, but a quick read that was intense because it sounds like a fun, kind of ski book, but it wasn't. It was more than that in the best way possible. So let's just dive in. First of all, just talk to me about your process, about other books you've written, and then why you wrote this book, why it's called A Bluebird Day. I know why it's called A Bluebird Day, but if you're not like a skier and you don't know what a Bluebird Day means, just sort of jump into it and then we'll dig into all the layers and pieces of this incredible book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was so great to meet you in Denver. And I'm so glad this book resonated. Bluebird Day is about a mother and a daughter who are former ski racers, and they've been estranged for many years. And they're now back together in a Swiss village when an avalanche socks in their town. And the only place to stay is a youth hostel with bunk beds. The mom has a secret she's trying to hide, and the daughter's trying to uncover it. And a Bluebird Day is a bright blue sunny day after a snowstorm. And that was the metaphor for the storm that the mother and daughter sort of go through in their relationship. And this is my second novel. My first novel, Super Bloom, came out in 2023. And I had a really windy path toward writing novels. I have a journalism degree and was a freelance journalist and writing for nonprofits. And I have my own writing and editing business. And I always thought the first book I would write would be nonfiction. And partly because I had some imposter syndrome. I was sort of like, well, who am I to write a novel? And a lot of the work I was reading was literary fiction, and it was wonderful. But I didn't see my voice in the works of, say, Virginia Woolf. I didn't see. And so I was sort of like,
there's a lot in between, but yeah,
there is a lot in between. But I was sort of like, I don't know. But then I started to take some writing courses and I started to dabble and slowly began writing my first manuscript. And it took 8 years from beginning to write it to getting an agent, getting a book deal, getting it out into the world. And it was a long slog, but I, in that process, learned just how much I love writing fiction. And I feel like it was sort of like an MFA course that took 8 years.
Which in the scheme of our life, is long, but not horrendously long. I mean,
Correct.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes. And now I know when I hear other authors speak that so many of them, there's another author I was just hearing the other day, I think it was Allegra Goodman, her latest book, Isola. She was like, I've been, playing with this book for 20 years. Yeah. And so many writers have novels in a drawer, or they've had false starts, or they've been working on books for many, many years. It's not uncommon. But for a while, I was like, God, this is taking forever. But now I know that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. I was actually on a plane this past weekend. I was heading to Gainesville, Florida for my middle son's mom's fraternity weekend.
Oh, nice.
And I had 2 other women in my row. And I'm usually actually not a flyer talker. I don't chat with people, especially when I'm flying by myself. No husband, no children. I didn't have to dole out food for anyone. I was on my own, which is the biggest vacation of all, just the flight by myself. Even though I have older kids and whatever. But I was chatting with these women, and one was heading with 8 other women for someone's 60th birthday. And we were talking, and turns out her oldest daughter is a professional skier.
Huh?
And I said, you have to read this novel. I was like, a Bluebird Day. It's phenomenal. And so first we started talking. She's like, what a great title. And I was like, yeah, if you know, like, a Bluebird Day is like the best day. And I said, I'm at a point in my life where I only ski on Bluebird days. Like, that's it. And then later in the week, I was actually having a catch up with a friend, and we were talking about skiing, and I was saying, I live in Denver and we've been going to Vail a lot, and I only go up on Bluebird days, like great snow, groomers, like it's got to be pretty much no cloud in the sky. Like, I'm older, I don't want to get hurt. So it's been so relevant since I've talked to you, and I got in this wonderful conversation with this stranger about professional skiing and this whole world, and she was talking to me about being a mom, and she skied, but she never got as far as her daughter. So it was sort of a flip of your, the characters in your novel. And it was so great. It was such a conversation starter. She downloaded it on her Kindle right then and there. It was awesome.
That's
it was
amazing,
really great.
Amy.
Yeah,
You're spreading the word.
It was so great. And I meant it, from my soul. And we started talking about really also the mental health component and aspect of not just skiing, obviously, and professional skiing and professional athletes, but also just of that world of intensity and raising kids who are really, hardcore sports and hardcore athletes. And there's a lot of them, like every single parent I talk to is, what are you doing this weekend? Well, I'm up at 6 a.m. because I'm taking, this one to lacrosse and this one to field hockey and this one there. And it's just this intensity that even if your kid's not like really good, it's like this insane thing. And there isn't like one good team. There's like 17 of them. So like everyone's into it. So I wanted to get into that because I thought that was a really big part, or one of the layers that I really enjoyed you getting into and peeling back in your book about the mental health component of sports in general, and of course of professional skiing. And what I thought, the way that you attacked it, that I really appreciated, was the difference between how the mom dealt with it and the daughter, and that generational change and how we see it. So will you talk about that a little bit, and the research that had to go into that, and how and why you felt it was an important piece to bring up in your book?
Yeah. So basically my character, the daughter's name is Wylie, and she starts having performance anxiety. She's an incredible skier. She's better than her mom. It kind of comes out of nowhere for her, and it sidelines her, and she kind of can't get a grip on it. And her mom doesn't totally understand it because she's come at it from a different angle. She's been taught, mental toughness. It's all about mental toughness. You grit it out. Sure, you're scared because, there are elements of downhill ski racing that are scary, but you just grit it out and you go for it still. And Wiley's in a different generation where she's sort of like, but I don't want to. I don't want to grit it out. And I began to explore the mental health side of elite sports. And I think we're in an age now where so many athletes are calling attention to it in a way they never did before, which is so amazing. I think just a few weeks ago, Michaela Schifrin, who's been recovering from her injury, posted on her Instagram. She was about to race and she was like, I have to be honest. I have a hurdle and it's my mind right now. And I'm dealing with fear and I'm pulling out of this race and I'm being really transparent about it. And that feels like that's like such a huge moment in the sport and just in sports in general, to be that transparent around what your mind is doing and how that's affecting your body. So I ended up interviewing a handful of former Olympic skiers to find out what it's like to compete at the highest level, and also, what it's like on the mind. And then I interviewed a sports psychologist, Jim Taylor, who does a lot of work with ski racers, young ski racers, to help them really harness their mind to its full potential, and then to deal with what happens when fear and anxiety kind of slams at them out of the blue, how to come back from that. And really looking at the flip side of mental toughness, which is mental resiliency and being able to kind of go and move with the flow when you find that you are coming up against anxiety and fear, that it's not just like gripping so hard that you ignore it, but that you kind of move with it and you can then better weather the ups and downs of the sport. And then in turn, of course, in life. And Claudine, the mom in my book, she was parented by a father who was a hard line, like get your ass up that mountain and you don't complain. And she didn't know any other way to parent. And so she kind of parents Wylie in the same way. But Wylie kind of rejects that and it causes a big rift between them.
And there's, like you picture a ski racer standing at the top, looking over the tips of their skis. And of course, there's adrenaline rush, and of course, there's trepidation, and of course, there's, a mix of all of that running through your body. And you need a lot of that in order to go flying out of the gate, right? And go barreling down that mountain. But there's this very thin line that if you cross over into where it paralyzes you, like you can be seriously injured. And so there's this sense that Wylie realized that she crossed that line and she didn't want to kill herself. I mean, She didn't want to die. Like she had crossed the line into fear and like the anxiety had pushed her so far and she hadn't learned the skills and no one had figured out that like she didn't have the help. She didn't have the ability. And good for her for knowing that, At first I went on the journey with Claudine where I felt like mad at her. Like I was upset and pissed and mad. Like, how it's your daughter. Like you're such a terrible mother. And then you go through, then you cross into, I didn't feel bad for her, but I felt like she was from a different generation and no one taught her. And then you felt like she then went on the journey where, God, I didn't know any better and no one taught me. And I didn't understand there was a different path and a different way to parent. And then she had to learn herself that there were other options. And it's just, this unbelievable generational shift of how do we not just parent differently and then learn the tricks of the trade or learn how to parent differently for ourselves, parent our own selves and then parent our children differently, but also like, how do we grow as humans? And then help the people around us grow. And it was really poignant watching each of them go through that journey. I mean, obviously that horrible avalanche and snowstorm. And then when they're trekking through and almost dying, like that was such the denouement. That was such the climax where like, you knew they'd make it because I didn't feel like you were that author. Like I was like, I didn't know you at that point personally. I'm like, I don't feel like it's the kind of author that like is going to kill them off. But like, I felt like they had to, really push through to figure out how to not just make it, but make it somehow together. Right? Like, how did you?
Yeah. And I think, I'm sure that you've experienced as a mom of 3 boys, the really hard moments where you're trying to figure out how much to push your kids and encourage your kids and how much to pull back. And my kids are 9 and 6. And I think this is going to be a whole journey. And already, like moments where my daughter's like, I don't feel like going to my piano lesson. And so how much am I like, well, we follow up with our commitments. We, sometimes we do things we don't want to do. So, like that sort of line. And then when do we listen to them and say, okay, I hear you. You don't like this sport or this isn't working for you. My son, for instance, who's 6, has some sensory issues and played basketball this fall. And he was really triggered by the sounds of the buzzer in the games. And he would be dysregulated for the rest of the day. And he was like, I don't want to play in the games. I only want to do the practice. And so we were like, okay, like that's a place, it feels like that is right for you. We're not going to push you. We're not going to force you. But there are tricky lines. It's the same line of the ski racing. Like, when do you cross over from respect of the danger to the fear? And when do you cross over as a parent from encouraging versus forcing? And I don't have a real answer for that, except for when I think about, well, what is my end goal here for my kid? Is it something that I'm trying to fulfill about myself versus something I'm trying to help them fulfill, that they've said, I really want to learn the piano. I really want to play this. But it's tricky. I mean, can you relate to that? I'm sure you can.
I mean, my mom used to say, like, I didn't push you out with a manual. Like, I'm doing the best. I didn't like fly out of my vagina with a manual. Like, you're just doing the best that I can. And my goal is to do better than my mom, and you'll do better than I did. So that's the best we can do. Yes, 100%. It's always push and pull, and bigger kids, bigger problems. Like,
oh my gosh.
It's always, yes. I could tell you 12 things in the last week that I've, tried to balance and figure out. And of course, and they'll just tell you how often you fail.
I know.
And you hope it's, exaggerated for sure. And, I guess that leads me to one of the other big things, which was, how did your relationship, and I know your relationship with your mom was tricky and layered as well. Will you talk about that a bit and how that potentially influenced this book? Did that show up in Super Bloom? And then if you're writing a third book, is that something you'll continue to explore?
That's a great question. So my mom sadly died from pancreatic cancer a few years ago. But before that, we definitely had our ups and downs. And in my early 20s, we were going through some estrangement. We were just having a hard time. And I was living with her for the summer out in the Pacific Northwest, and she suggested that we do these outdoor adventures together every week. And I really balked at that. I was sort of like, oh my gosh, like we can barely chat, here in the kitchen. Being stuck in a car together, driving to a hiking spot, hiking all day, it sounded really challenging.
Was this something that you did in your childhood? Was this something totally outside the box? Was she an outdoor person? Were you an outdoor person?
I mean, not that much. I think she could see that I was beginning to like hiking and exploring the Pacific Northwest because we grew up in Nebraska. And my mom had remarried.
Quite flat.
Very flat. She'd be remarried. And so this was a new landscape for us.
Okay.
And so I think she'd been kind of thinking, like, how do we repair? How do we get closer? And so I agreed. And we took like our first hike. And then every Wednesday over that course of that summer, we started doing more and more things together. Kayaking. We took, we ended up taking an overnight trip to the Pacific rainforest. And it was pretty miraculous in that I think when you're doing something physical together, it lowers your guard. And instead of like hashing out old things and trying to just like talk things through, you're doing something active. And this was before all this research came out about what being in nature and being awed by nature does to the brain, and allows you to kind of kind of come to each other and create new synapses in your brain. And so we were kind of awing our way toward forgiveness together. And it was the first time that I really sort of stood back and was like, oh, my mom is a person. She's not just a mom, it has kind of a one-dimensional kind of.
How old were you?
I was about 20.
How old was your mom?
Yeah, I was about 23. My mom was about the age I am now, which is 45. My mom had me when she was quite young. So I had graduated from college, and I was just kind of like, wait, my mom's a person.
This is the normal age when this happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's
when you
very
start to
interesting. Yeah.
When you see them as a person, then you can give them more grace, and you can see that every person makes mistakes, every person
Mhm.
is fallible. And then she could see me not just as a daughter, which is also one dimensional, but as a person. And so when it came time to writing Bluebird Day, I wanted to take that idea of being physical together and being outside and having a sort of physical goals together, and to have these characters, this mom and daughter, working through an estrangement and thinking about forgiveness and self-forgiveness, and kind of coming to this idea of like, wow, you are a fully formed person, and I want to step away from this one-dimensional idea that I had of you. So that really informed Bluebird Day. And Super Bloom, she really didn't inspire much about that novel. That novel is interesting because it is about grief, and
Mhm.
the novel came out a few months after she died. And so I was suddenly, on tour talking about a novel about grief, having just lost my mom, and
Yeah.
also in the throes of writing a novel about a mom and daughter. So it was a very bizarre time,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Were you when your mom passed away, had you found peace with each other?
Yeah, yeah, we had a really one. I mean, we've had various ups and downs, although we've always had this great foundation from that summer. And
Mhm.
then we had a really wonderful. She was an incredible grandma to my children, and I would say we had a particularly wonderful last year of her life before she got ill, and I'm so grateful to that. I miss her so much. I was just thinking about her today. I was packing up some clothes. I think, I'm noticing that my kids have outgrown and are not playing with the last gifts she bought for them. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with them. And
What
I
kind of
feel,
gifts are they?
like they're just adorable sleeping bags in the shape of an owl. And my mom got my daughter all these dress up clothes that are just these beautiful dresses and shoes that she can't fit in anymore. And I just, it's just such a loss. I don't know what to do with these items. And so I've just been kind of staring at them, and do I set them aside? So I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, but they're not playing with them anymore. And that's how it goes.
Yeah. I'd
Yeah.
get like a really cool trunk and not give them away for a
Right.
while.
I know.
Yeah. Like
I
why?
know.
I don't know.
Just
Like
I
what's
don't
the
have to make a decision yet.
No, not if you're not ready. I don't
I
know.
know.
Like who knows? Maybe there'll be like a play or like a theater thing.
Mm.
I don't know. Like maybe there's something down the road where you will like need them or want them
Yeah.
or someone will. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
I
know.
know. I think I'm almost keeping them right now, I think for myself, because I see them and I'm like, oh, that was my mom just showing them so much love. She knew them, their personalities. And so I think it's more for myself than them, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think
Yeah.
that's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're gifts. They're special. You don't get them back. Yeah. I
The
don't
nice
know.
thing
It's
is
nice.
when she got diagnosed, she died in 4 months from
Oof.
her diagnosis to passing. And when she first got diagnosed, my publisher, Zibby Books, rushed her an early copy. They printed out a copy of Super Bloom for her because she hadn't read it yet. And
Mm.
so she got the manuscript in the mail. And then my aunt was with her at the time. And then she kind of took 20 pages at a time because my mom was already so weak, so that she could read these 20 pages at a time. And my book was one of the last books she read, and she read it twice. And that just,
Oh,
was so amazing that she did that.
that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really beautiful. That's really
Yeah,
special.
it
It's really
is.
special that you had that time and the reconciliation and the memories and then the love with your kids. I mean, that's all just, I mean, that's magical. It's really magical. And then the ability to weave it into these stories that then get transformed into other people's imagination and that other people can then weave into their own stories and their own lives and make sense for them. I think that's the joy of writing, right? Like that's like what books give to people, right?
Yes, exactly.
Tell me again why skiing? What was the like
Yeah.
why did you pick skiing?
Good question. As I said, I grew up in Nebraska. There wasn't a lot of places to ski. I skied at a
Yeah.
place called Nebraska. Um, and it was sort of an anthill, very small. And then in college, I took some lessons in Colorado. I skied in Vail and Breckenridge, and then I skied in New Mexico. And then I studied abroad in London and took a spring break in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And I skied on a glacier, and I thought I was a better skier than I was. And I got up to this glacier that took 2 gondola rides to get up, and it was above the tree line. And I just suddenly became paralyzed with fear. And it felt like my legs melted out from under me. And I was able to draw on that feeling for Wylie.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get down. And an old Swiss ski instructor skied over to me and was like, "It looks like you're having a problem." And I had been like crying. My goggles are all fogged up. I could not move my body. So he helped me ski down. It took 2 hours, and I would make these wide loops and I would fall. And he was so patient and so kind. I'm so grateful to him. And, I didn't ski for many, many years. I sort of dabbled again with my husband, but it's never kind of, taken off for me again. But as it came to writing this book, I knew I wanted to write about female athletes and what it's like to be a competitive woman and the elite sports world. And I was brainstorming what that sport would be. And I was like, well, what about ski racing, downhill ski racing? And I started to research it and loved the thrill of it, the danger of it. I loved that with other sports, you can kind of imagine doing it, like whether it's basketball, you can kind of see yourself in it.
Mm-hmm.
But with ski racing, it's just so hard. And so I was like, okay, that's it. That's my sport. And I kind of threw myself into learning everything I could about it and reading books and doing interviews and watching documentaries and all that sort of thing to really breathe life into the sport. And I also loved that there's metaphor in it, and metaphor in Bluebird Day, and this idea of even like moguls, like the ups and downs of their relationship, and it just really fit. And then I wanted to, because I had this experience in Switzerland and that I love that it's such a beautiful country,
Mm-hmm.
knew that I wanted to set it there, and it just all began to click into place.
And then my last question is, how did you come up with them being in a youth hostel? That is so awful. Like it is so it's so realistically awful that it's just hysterical. Like, I literally think I laughed out loud. I'm like, what? How did that happen? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like if I was like, oh, there's nowhere to stay but a youth hostel, I'd be like, I'm not, like, I can't. Like that's
I'm
just
outta here.
crazy. I'm out of here.
So in my 20s, I traveled all over the world and stayed in youth hostels, Thailand,
me too,
Cambodia,
but not as a grown up.
Yeah. So in Switzerland, the hostel in the book is based off of this youth hostel I stayed at in Switzerland that had a basement disco and kept me up all night. And, I knew I wanted to have this idea of found family, which I always really love writing these sort of secondary characters who begin to bring out the different personalities in each of my characters, especially because Wylie and Claudine weren't really talking to each other a lot. So I needed other people to pull that from them. I wanted to make it quirky and I wanted to make it unexpected. And, it really fed all of those things. And when I was traveling in youth hostels, there were always bizarre characters, and there was always an older couple who love youth hostels, and they're always kind of wise, and they, then you're kind of like, what are you doing here? So it just had all these elements that were going to make for really fun fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're reading it and you're like, this is so unrealistic. Like, who are these people? But if you've ever been to a youth hostel, it's very realistic. It's just this like a very motley crew of total misfits. It's really true. I was in Santa Monica a couple weeks ago, actually, and I was taking a yoga class that's right next to this hostel. And I was watching people come in and out, and I was like, yes, these are just people that are so random, like these like Germans who were like 6'9", and then these like other like, it was just like all these random people, young, old. It was just very interesting. I'm like, that's a hostel. It's very interesting.
Yes, exactly.
And why they call it a youth hostel, because you're supposed to be kind of young, traveling the world, but everyone's all ages and shapes and sizes. And it's really funny. And it was seemingly random that's where you said it, but not.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't have had that same camaraderie if it was a hotel. There was lots of wonderful hotels to choose from in Zermatt, but I was like, it needs something where they're kind of in a tighter fit and they're all there's more camaraderie. They're eating together, and sometimes it's like suspect breakfast offerings.
Right.
And the people who work there are, have their own backstories, and so it just kind of fit it, and it was so fun to bring it to life.
And there's this sense of when you're at like a hostel, it's almost like a semester abroad in college. Like you feel like you have to hang out and you have to eat with everyone and you have to like do a group outing, like you feel like a jerk if you don't, which is how it sort of felt, which was really cool. And it made sense, and it did. And like you said, it helps them repair and their relationship and listen and talk it out in this way of not talking to each other, but other people, which was really brilliant. It was pretty cool.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. So what's next? What's brewing? Are we allowed to know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm working on a third manuscript. It's a total palate cleanser. It's a holiday rom-com that's been so fun to write, set in New York. I just got notes back from my agent, and it'll be, some months for me revising before we submit it. And who knows, you just, the ups and downs of publishing. Hopefully it'll, get out into the world. Well, who knows, but it's been super fun to write. And I just hope, knock on wood, that I continue to be able to write books, because I love doing it. It's just such a blast.
I love it. Well, this has been just wonderful. I loved interviewing you multiple times. Maybe we get to do another one.
I know. I'm up for it.
I love it. It's just great. Your energy is brilliant. And I love the way you write. It's so, like I said from the beginning, it's like these fast reads that you think you're going to just sort of, to me, like, it's like this, like, ooh, it's a beach read, but it's not. It's so layered and nuanced and deep and meaningful. And I'm partial to these sort of mother-daughter stories that hit home, and the elements of, of mental health, and then also relationships that go really deep under the surface and include other characters that have their own things. I feel like it's a book that could have spin-offs.
Yeah.
Like I really want there to be more. I want to read more about both Claudine, but I actually want to know more about Wylie.
Yeah.
And I want to have her romance story. What was the name of
Calvin.
I really want them to go off on a journey. I want to learn more about them.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the best book, right? Where you it's not just that you don't want it to end, but you want like a part 2. And I'm still thinking about it. So It was great. And I know that woman on the plane is going to read about it. And they're in a book club, these women celebrating their 60th.
That's
so
amazing.
We'll see what happens.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you spreading the word. That's what it takes.
It's great. It's easy when, it's genuine. So it was great. Well, thank you, Meg. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Amy.
And we'll be in touch. We'll keep it going.